Hey, y'all, join in on this special episode for the Ducks Unlimited podcast. We go on a 2-part series on retriever safety, looking at how to keep your dog safe in the summer training months and in those field cold winter months. Tune in with our special guest to learn how to keep your retriever safe in the field.
Can we do a mic check, please?
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Ducks Unlimited podcast.
I'm your host, Dr. Mike Brazier.
I'm your host, Katie Burke.
I'm your host, Dr. Jerad Henson.
And I'm your host, Matt Harrison.
Welcome to the Ducks Unlimited podcast, the only podcast about all things waterfowl. From hunting insights to science-based discussions about ducks, geese, and issues affecting waterfowl and wetlands conservation in North America. The DU Podcast, sponsored by Purina Pro Plan, the official performance dog food of Ducks Unlimited. Purina Pro Plan, always advancing. Also proudly sponsored by Bird Dog Whiskey and Cocktails. Whether you're winding down with your best friend or celebrating with your favorite crew, Bird Dog brings award-winning flavor to every moment. Enjoy responsibly.
Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Ducks Unlimited podcast. I'm Dr. Jerad Henson. I'm going to be your host today. I'm joined again by co-host Nathan Ratchford. Nathan, thanks for being here.
Absolutely.
And again, we're jumping back into some retriever safety. This is going to be part 2 of that episode. Part 1, take a listen on that. We jumped into kind of some summer heat safety, things like that you should be concerned with. And our special guest from that episode is with us back for part 2, Dr. Jason Robinson. Thanks for joining us in the Ducks Unlimited studio.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
So we started off that first one, like I mentioned, kind of going into this how to be safe with heat, with summer training, snakes, all of that type stuff. This part, we're going to kind of shift gears a little, move more into field season, right? Not field trials, but field season, hunting, different suite of problems to run into. And temperature things.
Cold weather stuff.
Right? Yeah, a lot of that. So I think we're going to just jump into it from here. We'll kind of start off a little bit with some injuries. What are the most common injuries you see in hunting dogs?
So, especially with the starting duck season anyway, probably the most common ones I see, one category you'd kind of lump into, soft tissue injuries. That would be, something you consider anything from like strain or sprain to kind of more serious, ligament tear injuries. Certainly in, my dogs that are hunting in, soybean fields or rice fields, you get a lot of paw abscesses because that stubble will stick into the bottom of the paw. The water's not clean. There's bacteria, and you get nice paw abscesses, and you see limbertail too.
I wanted to back up on those, Doc. The soft tissue injuries. Let's talk a little bit about why, right? Why that occurs, why you see that so frequently, and then how we go about addressing that if it does, right? I mean, I know that's going to vary with soft tissue injuries, so we don't need to go into the weeds there on, after the fact, but just so people know, what they might do to prevent it. And then if it happens, are they laid up for the season or, what comes after?
Right. So we're kind of asking these athletes to be in this high impact sport. So going into the season, can you prevent all of these soft tissue injuries? You can't. But having said that, having an in-shape athlete, they're less likely to injure themselves. And so leading up to the season, that training doesn't just start, a month before. You're swimming them a bunch, you're running a bunch of, marks and things like that. And I think weight can play a lot into that. So
yeah, I've noticed that with my dogs is that weight, being careful, making sure that you pay attention to nutrition and maintain a healthy weight can go a long ways, not just on soft injury issues, but arthritis down the road, things like that are big things that I've noticed, especially with labs. they're notorious for it. So
yeah, high impact, sport like that is going to always be a player. Yep, down the road.
And would you say that those injuries tend to lay the dogs up for the longest compared to some of these others that you went through?
It kind of depends.
Okay.
It kind of depends on severity of the injury. Was it a ligament tear?
Right.
That's a surgical fix, and you're 3 to 6 months before you're back in action. Some of the other ones, you're talking about like anti-inflammatories and rest, and there's even some icing and heating and types of physical therapy stuff that you can do to kind of facilitate them getting back in action again sooner.
And for the pause, like prevention, can you toughen them up kind of before the season, maybe with some, just making sure? I mean, I know at least in my dogs, it was most noticeable going in the winter, but like there's definitely a spectrum there, with dogs and their paws. Like some dogs out in Arizona, man, they just seem like they're so tough that, even cactus, it doesn't bother them nearly as much or penetrate. I don't know exactly how that goes, but can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, not having a tenderfoot, right? But the paw abscesses, there's not really anything you can do to stop that one. That's as soon as you see some swelling and you hunt in a field, that's go to the veterinarian. I do, you should always do a tailgate check, right? When you get out of a field and stuff like that. And if you see, I literally had a lab. This wasn't even in a field. It was, we were hunting in like a buckbrush situation, but stick right through the paw, and like the dog didn't tell anybody. And I literally was like, okay, well, we're going to pull that out, flush that out, and get on some antibiotics. But toughening up the pads is a different situation. And, doing things as simple as, walking them on the sidewalk, short bumper retrieves on the sidewalk and things like that continually, through the year, not only helps with the pads, but also kind of keeping their nails filed down.
Yeah. But don't get them out on hot asphalt in the summer.
Right.
Because they can burn their pads.
Right. Yeah. Right.
Yeah. So going back to that previous episode, more about that.
Yeah. And not much sprinting either, because you don't want to like tear pads. You can deglove a pad that way. But, consistent motion work, walking them and stuff like that will go a long way to toughen up the pads themselves.
Not necessarily retrievers, but my grandfather used to train bird dogs, quail dogs. And one of the first times they actually took some trips down to Texas or also into the Arkansas River Basin and that real sandy ground. It's the first time they ever really got into sand burrs. And that got in between their pads on some of his bird dogs. That was his first time to ever be exposed to that. He actually lost a dog to an abscess. They didn't catch it early enough. They didn't know to look for it. Very different. So things like that, just being aware. Again, know your dog and know your dog. If your dog's acting weird or favoring a paw, even a little, give it a once over. So
another thing I always look for, but I spend a lot of time, in the field too, is mean seeds. Especially on any soft tissue, but paws, they're the least visible, right? Checking for those. Always, to your point, good tailgate check is just key, I think.
Yeah, and if you're hunting in a spot and you're a field hunter, and you got a swollen paw, let's get to the vet and go ahead and see if they can get any debris out of that. Start antibiotics as soon as possible to prevent, a real bad abscess where you have like a rupture situation.
Yeah, you don't want your bud to be taken out of the game for
They'll
longer than they have to, right?
Yeah.
How about limber tail? Is there anything you could do before?
Well, so limber tail is you're straining the muscles that support, motion of the tail. And, I don't know that there's a 100% effective way to prevent it. Having said that, most of the time it's a dog that is going out for the first time in the season, or it's just a really good, beginning of the season, cold water,
right?
Lots of retrieves. And so that being said, always going back to training and making sure you're in shape going into a season. I think that, the more swimming drills that you're getting in before that season starts, the less likely you are to encounter that injury. Once you get it, it's not the end of the season. You still have to go to, your veterinary clinic. And, what I do when I see them, it starts with like 5 to 7 days of rest. It's painful. You can lift up their tail and they say, ouch.
Yeah.
And they kind of, the signs of it, they kind of carry the tail. It just
people
flaps
call it
and just kind of
tail,
hangs, and they don't
bent
wag, and they'll just kind of hang there. And so it's painful. So I'll start out with like a pain medication, an anti-inflammatory. The pain medication just for, a few days. Anti-inflammatory, I'll go like a week and a half, just because, if you're going to take off like 5 to 7 days, you're going to, right when you get back into it, I don't want to re-injure it, have like an anti-inflammatory on board so the dog's comfortable.
Yeah. And so other than I was kind of saying this earlier, but so bent tail, kennel tail, cold water tail, all these different names.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same thing.
It just really hangs, and they don't wag it.
And I made the mistake. My lab got it pretty bad a few times, but the worst time, he was pretty well trained, but we were doing lots of field marks and blinds, things like that. We go out to duck hunt the first day, and he goes, and he has a fantastic day. I mean, he picks up like 20-something ducks.
Big day retrieving.
And it's all deep water retrieves.
Yeah, swimming. Yeah.
All swimming, minimum 30-yard swim back. And so, yeah, that was a shell shock to his system. My fault for not preparing him for it. But understand the situation you're going to put your dog into, right? That's something that we can do to help that out.
Yeah, preseason training.
Yeah. And accurate training for what you're going to be putting that dog into.
Yeah. Don't go 0 to 80, right? And anything you do, right? You're talking about soft tissue, build them up, make sure they're in condition. Same thing with swimming, right? I mean, good prevention ahead of going into the season.
Are some dogs just more prone to it?
You primarily see it in, maybe Labradors, but Labradors are also a very popular breed to hunt with. So that probably has more to play into why you see it in Labradors and other breeds, to be honest with you.
Okay.
What are some essential things? I mean, given what a hunter might encounter out in the field, what's most likely, what are some things that they should have in a field medical kit?
Like a first aid kit?
Yep.
So actually, I made up a little list because I'm a list guy. I'm gonna check all the boxes, make sure that if I use it up, check the box, I got to put it back in. But at the top of that list, I'll start with something that's a newer medication and something that most people don't think about. But when you're going into hunting situations, sometimes you're staying at a farmhouse or a lodge that you're not familiar with, and there might be some rat bait or like something that's toxic out there, and your dog gets a hold of it. You want them to, the key principle there is get it out before it has a chance to absorb. There's a new product called Clever, and it's ropinirole, and it causes, you can induce vomiting just by doing eye drops. And so based on your dog's weight, how many drops it gets, and it says it on the package insert. And I've been in a lot of situations, where dogs have gotten into something, and you got to get them to, throw it up so that they don't absorb it and get the LD50, dose. But that's one thing that I would have in a first aid kit. 30 mil syringe, flushing out, eyes, flushing out a wound, something like that. Saline would be another thing that I would have for that flushing process. Blood sugar situations, Karo syrup is a good thing to have, in a small little bottle if you can put it in a little container with it. You can also get, 50% dextrose from like your cattle feed stores and stuff like that. And, 5 mil volume of that, or a small volume of that 30 mil syringe. And if they're having low blood sugar problems, Neosporin's another one I keep, and, put that into a wound if they get a laceration or something like that. And on that laceration aspect, Coban, which is kind of like a stretchy, adherent wrap, and 4x4 gauze. So, if they get that laceration, pack it with some Neosporin, gauze over it, wrap it, get to the vet so they can, closing fresh wound edges is better than seeing them a couple days later. That's a longer time to heal and more difficult on the dog. I'd put a multi-tool in there. That's always handy to have. Pepsid AC and famotidine for multiple reasons. Pepsid AC and Benadryl for multiple reasons. But upset tummy, Pepsid AC, and try to get to the vet. You start seeing hives or something like that. Allergic reaction, Benadryl. Pair of scissors. Q-tips. Hunting dogs in fields, maybe CRP and stuff like that. They might get some seeds in their eyes and under their eyelids. Running some saline underneath that eyelid, tops of the eyelids, and then, roll that Q-tip behind the third eyelid, the one that comes up, pull it out and kind of, grab seeds that otherwise could scratch a dog's eye. A thermometer, hypothermia or heat stroking them. And then, you hope you don't ever need it, but an emergency like Mylar thermal blanket, hopefully you don't fall in the water and need it. And hopefully your dog never gets cold enough to need it. But that's a pretty broad encompassing, kit. You might not be able to fit all of that into a blind bag, but something that keeping in the truck or at your duck camp or something like that for sure.
How about for the hunters who are traveling, out west or long roads ahead of them this season, and their dogs, they get stressed, right, during travel? Probiotic or anything for in the event that their digestion goes further south?
Great question. So, consulting your veterinarian, because they're going to know your dog's GI tract best, especially. But there's definitely good probiotics out there that you can give just preemptively, or maybe like even stress medications that you might give for driving. Some dogs just don't like it. Some dogs love it, and then, there's some other situations where you're like, hey, I know there's going to be some giardia where I'm getting into, and you would talk to your veterinarian about appropriate medications for that. And there's also some antimicrobial medications that you can use to keep their stool firm, their GI tract happy, that they're not necessarily probiotics. They're more things that kind of absorb water and decrease inflammation in the intestines.
While we're on the subject here of just traveling with your dog while you're hunting, should hunters make sure that wherever they're going, they know where an emergency vet, or is that, nearby? Is that a good precaution to take if you're going to hit the road?
Yeah. I mean, if you're going to a destination and you're not familiar with the area, knowing where the nearest emergency vet is would definitely be something that I'd keep on, easy to download into contacts. Knowing your veterinarian well enough to call them, also helps. Yeah. But if you're going, like you're saying, cross country or something like that, when you're getting there, you're always looking up where you're going to stay, where you're going to eat. Yep. Might as well have in your phone where the local emergency vet is, just in case.
Especially if you don't have service, right? When you're out in the field, just doing that in advance is always a good precaution.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Which direction to go.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. What about, and you hear this and you read this in other first aid kits and things like that. And a lot of times people will say even things like staplers and things for other wound care. Maybe not necessary, and probably one of those things that, don't use it if you don't know how to use it.
Exactly right. But, so go and get like a training course, and there's veterinarians that will do this, because there's some wounds that if you're trained appropriately, you should close, but you should still go to the vet. Yeah. But there's some wounds that you don't, because you're going to trap some bacteria in there that love the fact that oxygen is not getting in there, anaerobic bacteria. Mm-hmm. And then you just closed a hole but made yourself a nasty abscess, or an infected wound. So that's why I kind of like packing it with like some Neosporin, wrapping it, keeping the wound moist and things like that. And then getting to the vet and letting them primarily close it and make sure there's not some deep pocket going somewhere. But yeah, if you're trained to do, been trained by veterinary personnel to do it, then, there's certain situations way out in the middle of nowhere where, you may have to close it, but I would get that training first.
Right. Yeah. I bring that up because you see those types of instruments and tools in some first aid kits, but you didn't mention it. So I wanted to kind of say, but again, make sure you know what you're doing first.
Right,
yeah.
right.
Yeah. I may open a small can of worms on this question because y'all are talking about travel. How should you transport your dog?
Weather dependent, right?
Right.
And
I guess this segues into, if we're good on that road, just from a safety standpoint, before you go to weather, probably shouldn't always have them riding in the front seat.
I usually kennel my dog, in a kennel crate, and I'm going to use some of the tougher kennel crates if it's going to be outside the cab, and make sure it's like ratcheted down. But even though I have an SUV, I like for my dog to ride in the kennel, because if I have a wreck, he's going to be bouncing around if he's not in that kennel.
Yeah.
Or if something stresses him, spooks him, whatever. I don't need him in my lap while I'm going, 70 down the interstate.
Right.
Yeah, that's a big concern for me always, just because I've heard so many stories.
Yeah, we had
dogs going through the windshield.
We had a coworker that lost a dog recently.
Yeah, it was
in
tragic.
a nasty wreck, and it was absolutely tragic. So yeah, now we can go into that cold weather, the weather dependent aspects of how you should transport your dog.
Yeah, so if they're inside your truck or whatever, that keeping them confined, kind of just talked about in a kennel crate's a good idea. Outside, I would pick a kennel crate where they're shown to be a little bit more insulated, or at least have a kennel cover around it. Those are kind of some factors for cold weather travel that I would make sure I take into consideration.
And on the flip side, we're not really talking as much about the heat side now, but I don't think we addressed it in the last one. So well ventilated, right? If you're transporting in warm air.
Well ventilated, and that cold water, the ice in the water bottle, feeding them ice cubes, all those things
can help in that.
Yeah, help with heat. Mm-hmm.
If you can put them inside the truck with you, and if you've got an SUV, that's probably a lot better, especially if it's real hot outside.
That's more ideal. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've seen some really cool videos. Actually showing that temperature change when they're in a really good kennel, like a gunner,
and they
really
have fans
insulated,
and things like that
and the
too.
fan, the temperature difference from the outside inside, both in the summer having a cooler in the kennel, especially with the fan system, but also in the winter, the dog's body temperature heats it up inside, and it keeps that heat in there.
Insulation.
Yeah, and I mean, I've seen videos where dogs actually, they open up and dog's been wet, and you see steam. I mean, it's in the middle of the winter. It's just incredible, the technology on those kennels.
Yeah. Okay. Now I'm done. Now we can move on. I think that brings us on to that next topic, cold weather safety, right? So we talked about in a car, in a kennel, but I mean, we're hunting these dogs in extreme environments a lot of times, right? It's cold.
Especially up north.
Not nice days.
Definition of cold down here when I moved down here is a little different, but
we get to 0. I think -1 the past year, and 0 a couple times the past years. That's way too cold for us. Don't get me wrong. I'm very thin-skinned. When it hits single digits, I'm cold. I'm back out. I'm out there. Don't get me wrong, but I'm cold.
Yeah, not nice days when you go duck hunting. You want the nasty days.
That's when the ducks are out.
Stuff. Yep.
Oh yeah, yep. That's when it's good. So, key signs for hypothermia. What are the things to really look for on your dog in those situations?
So you'll first, obviously dogs will shiver, and be and that's that shivering and shaking. They're trying to generate body heat. But where it truly starts to set in, and you see maybe I'm getting kind of a little danger zone area. Those dogs that, again, high prey drive, they love their job, and so their nonverbal communications, their body posture is up like this. Their heads, if they're in a blind, it's looking out of the hole. If they're in the pit, they're looking around like that. When they stop doing that and they kind of withdraw back in, they'll start to kind of curl up and stuff like that. That's like your first sign. Maybe we're getting a little cold. And then, if it gets a little too far, the gum color's pale or blue. They're lethargic. They're not really getting responsive. They basically kind of shut down.
I've had a dog do that.
And so, that's get them dry, get them in a car, turn on the heater, go ahead and call it.
Yeah. It surprised me when I had it because it was cold, but it wasn't like too cold. And the dog, I don't know what it was about that one day. The long retrieve chasing a cripple. Took off and came back, and he made it about, 30 yards from me, and he just crawled up on like his front legs on a log and just he was there.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's not good. So I run, pick him up, get him out of the water, and we're a long ways from anywhere. And the good news was the sun had come up and it was warming up real fast. Mm-hmm. So I spun the dog stand around on the sunny side of the tree, moved him up in a sunny spot, and set him on there. And he warmed up pretty quick. I mean, but the water was cold.
Yeah, and time in the water too.
So, right, yeah, that was what got to him after a while. And after that, we were much more careful about it. But it's a scary situation.
Yeah.
You don't want to see that.
Yeah, that's a great point, Jason. Like time in the water, right? If you, especially you have a day where there's an opportunity to take another dog, right? And you got a big group, rotating them out, things like that. Acclimation.
Yeah,
as you mentioned, that's the biggest thing. What else can we do to keep them warm in there? What else? Vests.
I'm a big fan of vests.
Yeah.
If you've ever like taken off your glove and kind of run it up in that armpit of that vest, you can tell it's warm. It's so much warmer.
Yep. It'll almost be dry, even though they're wet. It's weird.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I then that's sitting around the core. So I really like vests in that situation. If you're kind of depends on the spot that you're hunting in. If you've got you're sitting in kind of a dog stand situation, having one of those dog blinds, so there's something that's kind of keeping them one out of the wind and holding some of their body heat around them. If you're can hunt in a blind, you're getting them up out of the water. I actually have a little bit of both of those situations, but hunting out of a blind when it's real cold, because I don't always want to stand in the water either. But I have a little portable heater that I bring for my son, and on the dog on real cold days. I don't usually bring my son; he's too young still on the real cold days. But I don't put it right up next to him because I don't want to burn him. But I move it like a safe distance back and, point it his direction, and he doesn't seem to mind it. He gets out and shakes and he knows what it is. And he kind of, and then I noticed that, he keeps his head out of that blind hole a lot better, like it's kind of hitting him right here in his rib area, core body. And he's like, I'm warm and I'm wanting to pay attention and get out there. So, those couple of things, if they've, getting them out of the water, trying to get them dry as you can, keeping a vest on them, keeping a heater on them, having a dog stand so they're out of the water. Those are some key things I would think would be helpful.
I see this question all the time, but how cold is too cold?
Climatization is kind of important, right? Because somebody from Minnesota is not going to think our winters are cold.
No.
Also, their dogs are going to have a different expectation of what cold is than our dogs are. Time in that water, because, that's going to be a real key factor into how cold they get. And, you can't just take a dog that's been in a heated house and then just go take them hunting. You need to train them through the season and take them on hunts, because they're getting climatized during the season as it gets colder. Also, they're building up their coat thickness. I don't wash my dog with soap after October. I make sure that coat is super oily. Nutrition plays a big role in that, and how cold they can, how much cold they can tolerate. Purina Pro Plan has like a 30-20, protein fat content, and you need that higher fat content because think about it, they're shivering. They're swimming, they're doing a whole bunch of exercise. How many calories they're burning? So all that kind of plays a factor into, I've got a good solid coat, I've got a lot of calories to burn. And then temperature is somewhat variable, hunting below like 20 degrees, that's not going to be fun. And there's lots of ice in that situation, which is going back to soft tissue injuries. That's how you'll see some of those. So that's kind of where I'd be careful. If I hunted at like 25 to 30, made it a short day, didn't keep my dog exposed to the water for too long.
And if you've got, like I've had some issues too with my dog and those situations where 25 degrees. We're flirting with that line, but all of a sudden the wind shifts out of the north and it starts blowing 20 miles an hour, and it's
colder.
noticeably colder real fast. And I can tell my dog had that effect. And so paying attention to that too. Yeah, that's something to definitely do. And I think kind of that acclimation aspect you're talking about, one of the things really important is 30, 40 years ago, most hunting dogs sat in the dog pen in the backyard.
Outside,
right?
Outside dogs, no in the house.
I'm pretty sure most people here, their dog is in the house,
Family
on the
member
couch,
now.
or in the bed, right? And so that's harder for the dog to go from the couch to ice water.
Yep.
And get comfortable with that. So be aware of that. Don't have that outside dog expectation for your dog if your dog sleeps in the bed with you. Right. Know your dog well. Understand kind of what you're asking it to do. I think that's important to do.
And every dog is different too, right? I mean, not just, I see it all the time with emphasis on coat, and coat matters, but big 100-pound Chesapeake Bay Retriever is going to handle that cold water a lot better than a 40-pound British Lab female, regardless of coat, right? Body mass and fat matters, right? Keeps them warm and insulated, So it's a lot of factors to weigh out when you decide to go out on a cold morning. One thing I did want to circle back, I know we talked about it on the last episode, but we talked a little bit about nutrition. But when is the best time? A lot of people ask, should I feed my dog in the morning, right? And I guess that depends too, right? Like what are your general guidelines, recommendations for feeding the dog so they have the best available energy, but they also avoid things like bloat. or some serious things that may come out?
Yeah, so great question. And, finding a reputable ration, balanced ration, high protein, high fat content. I use the example of, Purina Pro Plan's 30-20. My own dog, I don't feed him before we go hunt that morning. I think you don't get good absorption of whatever you put in there, and you're going to rattle that stuff around in the GI tract, which afterwards you have to clean up. So feeding them the night before, they're going to assimilate all that energy from the ration the night before.
Right.
Do I feed them after the hunt, after they've calmed down to avoid bloat like you're talking about? Yes, I do. And I split the ration in two that day, half, hour after they're done hunting and calm down. And then, later on that evening, the next half of the ration, so that they're, there's not food on their belly when they're getting out there and hunting.
Yeah.
And, you can, Purina does a good job of kind of tailor making, there's a 30-20 may not be appropriate for your weekend warrior as it is for like your guide, retriever.
Yeah.
Those dogs are out there picking up birds day in, day out versus, you got a dog that's just going on the weekends or twice a month or something like that. And so they have, a 27-16 instead of a 30-20 protein fat ratio. So they don't need as much fat. Going back to soft tissue injuries, staying, you don't want an overweight dog.
Yeah.
So balance ration and, appropriate protein fat content.
And just to reiterate, most people know this, but what does a healthy retriever look like? Like healthy weight retriever?
Because
people argue over this, and my wife and I argued over this at the beginning, right? And so trying to explain healthy weight versus
so you talk about like a body condition score, and you go into any vet's office, anywhere, and they're going to have like a little chart on the wall that shows different images of dogs.
Yeah.
And kind of the ideal number on that body condition score, you have kind of that hour. If you look from the top of the dog, they kind of have an hourglass figure. Ribs stick out farther than the waist, hips stick out farther than the waist. And then when you're looking at them from the side, kind of where the bottom of their rib cage is, bottom of their chest, it should go kind of like the hypotenuse of a right triangle going back towards their waist. That you don't want it like straight across like a barrel. They having that angle going back, they're not carrying too much weight.
And you might see a little bit of ribs, not too much rib, but like you can see a little rib definition. And that was
especially the last one.
I bring that up because my wife and I had this discussion a lot. She thought that I was underfeeding our dog, and oh my goodness, but we finally got to a spot where she realized he was fine.
Yeah.
Well, labs are like that. They'll look at you and they're
Oh no, oh yeah.
Oh, they'll
Yeah.
put doggy hypnosis on you and get the food out of the bag.
second breakfast.
Yep.
and,
Yeah.
Yeah, mine got
Third lunch and
kids. They learn how to really manipulate a toddler.
Yeah. Yeah. Kids are
For
like
that
food
extra.
dispensers, just
Yes.
like dropping it off their plate on the floor.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's that extra food.
and at the same time making sure that they have, to your point about rations, making sure if they're being worked really hard, increase that food a little bit more, even if it's beyond the recommendations, right?
Yeah. Smaller, frequent, but not necessarily like increase ration size per meal. So, add another meal into the day is kind of a safe way to do that.
Gotcha. That's a good tip right there.
Yeah. We and people can argue over table food or not, but
I would stay away from it. Just kind of a blanket statement. I mean, that's, not only do you get dogs that you can't tell, they're looking at their dog food and they're like, I'm gonna wait for that pizza to come out of the oven, or whatever, that's more acutely aware when they get ill, because first thing dogs do when they get sick, usually stop eating.
right. Okay. Yeah, I brought that up because like after a really hard hunt, some days if we're eating a good breakfast or lunch, sometimes the dog will get some leftovers.
Yeah,
after
sure.
they've cooled down, things like that.
A little piece of biscuit,
Good job.
something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And good
Thanksgiving, all bets are off. So.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I'm a realist. Yeah. I understand.
you worked hard, buddy. Here you go. Well, I mean, I think this was a great kind of overview of a lot of the field aspects and hunting aspects of retriever safety that
Absolutely.
people need to be aware of. Is there anything else y'all really want to note?
I think we cover a lot.
Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah, kind of getting into the season in shape is one of the keys to success, I would say.
That's
It's
the big thing.
emphasis. Yeah.
Yeah. And prevention, right? Just be aware of prevention. So whether it's fitness, whether it's acclimating your dog, being aware of the water you put them into, make sure your nutrition's up to date, just be in tune with that stuff and on top of it on the front end, not at the end. And don't expect your dog to be a endurance athlete if you did no training.
If you didn't do the training.
I
put
think
in
that's
time.
been
Right.
the biggest takeaway is in all most of these injuries that we talked about, a lot of it comes down to dog's fitness going into the season. You can't just expect to go off the couch and,
Right.
same thing for us. We need to hit the clay range, a couple times before we
Or
expect
the
to
hiking
hit
trail or
something.
yeah. There's nothing to let you know you're out of shape like hitting a rice field in waders from the couch.
Yeah.
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 You go, oh, yeah, I'm not in shape.
Yeah.
It's not the same thing as watching DUTV. It's not.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Got to actually move.
Well, Nathan, Jason, thank y'all for joining me today.
Thank y'all
This
for
has
having me.
been a really fun podcast. Thanks again to Chris Isaac, our producer over here for the podcast. And thank you to the listeners for listening in. Hopefully y'all enjoyed this episode, learned a little bit. Tune back in, see what we've got coming up for next time on the Ducks Unlimited podcast. See y'all.
Thank you for listening to the DU Podcast, sponsored by Purina Pro Plan, the official performance dog food of Ducks Unlimited. Purina Pro Plan, always advancing. Also proudly sponsored by Bird Dog Whiskey and Cocktails. Whether you're winding down with your best friend or celebrating with your favorite crew, Bird Dog brings award-winning flavor to every moment. Enjoy responsibly. Be sure to rate, review, and subscribe to the show and visit ducks.org/DU podcast. Opinions expressed by guests do not necessarily reflect those of Ducks Unlimited. Until next time, stay tuned to the Ducks.